Warm, gentle acoustic music fades in. The screen shows a bustling but cozy cafe, the kind of place where the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls feels like a hug. The air in the Riverside Diner hummed with the familiar sounds of a Tuesday afternoon, the clink of silverware, the low sizzle from the kitchen, and the soft murmur of weary regulars finding their usual seats. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow just enough to breathe, where the worn leather booths held decades of quiet conversations and unspoken prayers. The windows were fogged slightly from the warmth inside, casting a golden haze over everything, and the smell of fresh pie cooling on the counter was enough to make even the most burdened heart soften. Just a little. Eleanor Sullivan moved between the tables with a practiced efficiency that masked her deep exhaustion. At 32, she had long since learned to hide the weight she carried behind a smile that looked genuine even when it cost her everything to produce. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical bun, a few loose strands framing a face that was still beautiful despite the fatigue etched around her eyes. She knew every regular by name, knew who took their coffee black, and who needed an extra minute before ordering, knew which booths had wobbly legs and which windows let in a draft when the wind blew a certain way. This diner was as much a part of her as anything else in her life, maybe more, given how much of herself she had poured into these floors over the past 4 years. Her life was a relentless cycle of double shifts and worry. She had been running on 5 hours of sleep most nights, squeezing in a few hours of rest between the dinner rush and the early morning prep shift she had picked up to cover a coworker's absence. She never complained, not to her coworkers, not to her mother on the rare Sunday calls, and certainly not in front of Lily. Eleanor believed with a quiet fierceness that defined her entirely that her daughter should never feel the gravity of their circumstances pressing down on her small shoulders. That was Eleanor's burden to carry, and she carried it with both hands. In a corner booth, her 7-year-old daughter Lily sat quietly with a library book spread open across the table and a half-finished glass of apple juice beside her. Lily was not like other children, her age in the way that she experienced the world. She was a child who noticed the details others missed, the way the afternoon sun filtered through the diner windows and painted warm rectangles on the checkered floor, the heavy sighs of the lonely people who came in for a single cup of coffee and stayed an hour longer than they needed to. She noticed when the old man in the corner was having a harder day than usual, and she would sometimes ask Eleanor to bring him a slice of pie on the house, even when they couldn't really afford the gesture. She wore a simple dress that Eleanor had stayed up past midnight to repair, stitching the hem back together with careful, tired hands under a lamp in the kitchen after Lily had gone to sleep. It was a small thing, a torn hem on a second-hand dress, but Eleanor had treated it with the same dedication she gave everything that mattered to her daughter. Lily's small hands were often folded together on the table in a way that made her look older than 7, like she was carrying something inside her chest that she couldn't quite name but was determined to hold carefully anyway. The bell above the door chimed. A swirl of cold October air rolled through the diner, and with it came a man who looked as though he had stepped directly out of a world that had nothing to do with worn booths and Tuesday pie specials. Jonathan Pierce entered the Riverside Diner the way a person enters a room they don't quite belong in, but somehow ends up staying, without ceremony, without announcement, almost as if he had been redirected here by something outside of his own decision-making. He was the kind of man people noticed immediately, not simply because of the perfectly tailored navy suit or the gold watch that caught the cafe light with a quiet, understated gleam, but because of the particular quality of his stillness. Jonathan Pierce controlled a billion-dollar manufacturing empire that employed thousands of people across 3 continents. His name appeared in financial columns and on the lips of boardroom rivals who spent considerable energy trying to predict his next move. He had built all of it himself, starting from a modest inheritance and a relentless drive that had consumed the better part of 2 decades. But his face, classically handsome in a way that photographers always managed to capture even when he wasn't trying, had grown cold and neutral over years of living at a distance from everything warm. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, trained to assess and calculate, and they swept the diner with the automatic efficiency of a man who could not turn that part of himself off even when he wanted to. He had ducked in on a sudden impulse, seeking a moment of quiet away from the endless negotiations and bottom lines that had become his only real companions. His driver was waiting 2 blocks away. He hadn't planned on staying long. He chose a corner table, not Lily's corner, the opposite one, and sat with his posture perfect and his phone turned face down on the table beside him, an unusual choice for a man whose schedule was typically governed by the device. He looked out the window at the street for a moment, then at the tabletop, and something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a loosening. The faintest suggestion of a man who was, underneath everything, very tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Eleanor approached his table with her notepad ready, offering the same tired but genuine smile she gave to every customer. She was used to people like him passing through occasionally, business people on their way somewhere more important, stopping in because the parking was convenient or the weather had pushed them through the nearest door. She never made them feel out of place. That was one of her gifts, the ability to make everyone feel equally welcome in the space she tended. She opened her mouth to ask what he'd like. But before she could speak, Lily stood up in her booth. The little girl had been watching Jonathan since the moment he walked in. Her book was forgotten, her apple juice untouched. Her eyes were wide and fixed on him with an expression that Eleanor had never seen on her daughter's face before, a look of absolute recognition, as though she were seeing someone she had been expecting. "Mom," Lily said. Her voice was clear and bell-like in the small space, carrying over the ambient noise of the diner with the effortless certainty that children's voices sometimes have. "That's him. That's the man from my dream." The words landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Eleanor froze. The color rose in her cheeks, and she turned quickly toward Lily, moving to her booth with the particular mortified speed of a mother whose child has said something inexplicable in front of a stranger. She pressed a gentle hand to Lily's shoulder and looked across the diner at the man in the navy suit with an expression of profound apology already forming on her face. "I'm so sorry, sir," Eleanor said, and her voice was steady even as her face burned. She has a very vivid imagination. Please don't mind her." She expected the man to nod tightly, offer a polite half-smile, and retreat back behind whatever invisible wall people like him carried around themselves. She had seen it before. Lily sat beside her and ate her cupcake slowly, occasionally glancing between the 2 adults with the patient expression of someone who had already seen how this scene would unfold. Jonathan listened. He did not offer solutions or pivot to advice. He did not reach for his phone. He did not perform sympathy. He simply listened with an intensity that was almost unnerving, the full weight of his attention on Eleanor in a way that she wasn't sure she had ever experienced from anyone. He had spent the better part of his adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His money, his influence, his endorsement, his approval. Every interaction was transactional at its core, even the ones dressed up to look otherwise. He had stopped expecting anything different years ago and had quietly organized his entire existence around that expectation. It was lonely in a way he had never allowed himself to fully examine. But here was a child who had recognized him before she knew his name, not for what he could offer, but as a symbol of something she had been hoping for. And beside her, a woman who had just told him deeply personal truths without asking for anything in return. "I've built an empire," Jonathan said after a long moment, and his voice was quiet in a way that made Eleanor look up. He was looking at his own hands, folded around the coffee cup. "I have more resources than I know how to use, and people who manage them on my behalf and properties I've visited twice. And I realize today, sitting here of all places, that I have been completely empty for a very long time. I've forgotten that life is about connection, that the whole point of it is people, and I've spent 20 years optimizing for profit margins and nothing else." Eleanor didn't say anything. She looked at him and understood, with the particular clarity that exhaustion sometimes produces, that he was telling her something true. That afternoon at the Riverside Diner was not the end of the story. It was not even the middle. It was the very beginning. the first sentence of something that neither of them would have been able to predict or plan for. Jonathan did not write a check and move on, which Eleanor had half expected and quietly dreaded as the most likely conclusion to the afternoon. He gave her his card, a simple card, just his name and a number, and asked if he could call her. Not in the way that people sometimes ask that question. He asked in the way of someone who is genuinely uncertain whether they deserve the answer they're hoping for. She said yes. He chose to show up. That was the thing about Jonathan that surprised Eleanor most, because she had believed in the private and protective part of herself where she kept her real expectations, that men like him did not know how to simply show up for the ordinary things. But he did. He attended Lily's school play in November, arriving early enough to get a good seat and clapping louder than anyone else in the auditorium when Lily delivered her 3 lines as a talking sunflower with an earnestness that brought actual tears to the eyes of several parents nearby. He became the person who helped with homework at the kitchen table on Thursday evenings, reading questions aloud in funny voices until Lily dissolved into laughter and forgot to be stressed about the long division. He was there when the car broke down on a Wednesday morning, and Eleanor was already running 20 minutes late for her shift, and he arranged for it to be fixed without making her feel the weight of having needed help. He traded his sterile penthouse with its clean lines and its view and its utter absence of any sign that a human being actually lived there for the complicated warmth of a real home. A home where someone had repaired a dress, hemmed by lamplight, where a 7-year-old kept a prayer journal, where the coffee was always a little stronger than necessary because Eleanor needed it to be. He realized over the course of those months that Eleanor Sullivan was the most extraordinary person he had ever encountered, not because her life was dramatic or because her story was designed to impress, but because of the way she measured the value of things in kindness, in integrity, in the consistency of showing up for people even when showing up cost you something. She was a woman who had been failed by someone she trusted and had responded by becoming more open rather than more closed, which Jonathan understood was one of the most difficult things a person could choose to do. And Eleanor learned something too. She had spent 5 years building walls that she told herself were for Lily's protection, when in truth they were for her own. She learned that letting someone into the life she had built so carefully was not a concession of weakness. It was not a signal that she had failed to manage alone. It was something else entirely, an act of courage, a way of saying that she trusted herself to know the difference between someone who was worth letting in and someone who wasn't. She trusted herself, she let him in, and the whole family became stronger for it. Years later, they would look back on that Tuesday in October as the moment everything changed. Lily would grow up and tell the story at dinner parties, the way she had stood up in a diner booth as a 7-year-old and announced to a billionaire in a Navy suit that she had been dreaming about him, and the whole table would laugh and marvel and ask whether she had really believed it. Lily would say without any hesitation that she had never doubted it for a single moment, because children who have learned to pay attention to the small and important things are rarely wrong about them. It proved something that all 3 of them came to carry as a kind of private faith, that the most profound answers to our deepest needs do not always arrive through the doors we are watching. They come through the unexpected ones, the ones we ducked through on an impulse, the ones held open by a cold October wind. They come from the smallest voices, the ones that speak with the kind of certainty that the world has not yet taught to be embarrassed. Because true wealth, the kind that actually sustains a person, the kind that holds you up at 3 in the morning when the fear gets heavy, is not located in any account or any empire. It is found in the simple, radical act of seeing another human being clearly and choosing, without guarantee or contract, to care about what you see. That is the only wealth that compounds in a way that matters. That is the only return worth building toward. If this story moved something in you, we would love for you to join our growing family here at Pure Kindness. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss a story like this one, because we believe that every act of genuine kindness sends out ripples far beyond what we can see, changing the world one quiet, ordinary, extraordinary heart at a time. If you know someone who needs a reminder today that they are not invisible, that connection is possible that help sometimes walks through the door when you least expect it. Please share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear, and we want to know about you. Have you ever had a moment where a stranger changed the direction of your life? Has a child ever said something that stopped you in your tracks and showed you exactly what you needed to see? Leave your story in the comments below. This community is built on those stories. Let's keep the kindness growing together.